In 1972, when Bill Ritchie was a professor of printmaking at the University of Washington, he was asked by Evergreen State College to write a shopping list of equipment for their new printmaking studio. 15 years later, he was invited again, this time to show the 4 printing methods: silkscreen, relief, intaglio, and lithography. His challenge was to demonstrate all 4 printing processes in 90 minutes, which he had never attempted at the UW. Following is the second in the series, recorded by a student volunteer and lightly edited for viewer convenience.
Now ink the block up again, but I'm going to add a little ink because now that I've done that light inking, I can build up the quantity and get a print that's stronger in color. Relief printing is when the ink comes from the tops of the plates, and the most common and frequently heard process is linoleum cut. And I just went over to the letterpress area over there, and I found a linoleum cut sitting there, mounted on a piece of particle board, piece of wood, and the thickness is exactly the same as all the type, the little letters, the alphabet and numbers and so forth, that's in all the cases. That's called type high. Type high. 2 words, type high, okay? And it's the same height as the type. So you can put this printing plate right with the words, and when you print, you get the text and the picture all in one pass. So that's why sometimes when you see linoleum for sale, it's mounted on type high blocks. And linoleum is a nice medium to carve. It's like it's carving a hard cheese. You know, you can carve in circles and directions. You never have any wood grain to think about because it's all uniform. The linoleum itself is a lot like modern linoleum, you know, vinyl and stuff like that. And people have used scraps from linoleum stores to make their prints on. But this particular kind is referred to as battleship linoleum. It sounds to me like it must have come out of the First World War or something. And it's cork and petroleum distillates all compressed together. That's what it is. It has the property of when you warm it, if you put it in the oven for 20 minutes at a low temperature, it gets real soft, and then you can carve it really easily. And it has that property. It was scarce up until about 10 years ago, but now there's been a rebirth in interest in linoleum cuts. And so linoleum's easy to buy. You can buy it in Seattle at Daniel Smith. But art people are the only ones that buy it now. The linoleum stores never heard of it anymore. And the other material, as you all probably know by now, is wood. The difference between linoleum cuts and wood cuts is that the wood has a grain to it, and unless you're a skilled carver and keep your knives very sharp, the wood grain is going to start pushing you around when you're trying to make an image. So if you've drawn an image on the block and then start trying to carve it out, you find this resistance. And you then have to figure out which is the best kind of wood to use. Should you use pine? Should you use fir? Should you use mahogany? You know, and every one of them has a little different property, not only in the way they cut, but also in the way they print. So it opens up a whole bunch of possibilities and a whole bunch of limitations. So again, this is why a lot of artists start mixing their techniques. For certain styles, they would use lino. Maybe for speed, they'd use lino for being very fast. But for the wood grain and some other property, they'd choose wood. So it becomes a little complicated. We have a lot of old plates around this studio. All these things along the walls are plates in one form or another. And any of them could be printed relief if there's enough texture on it, because relief printing is only going to hit the high spots. This is a particularly, it's an interesting plate. It's not an intaglio plate. It's a metal plate, but it's meant to be printed relief. So we've got linoleum cut and wood cut, and now we've got metal cut, basically. And this is an old-time cut. This is probably made, in the 30s or the 40s. And it's a bunch of little illustrations. It's got a water pump on it and a gas pump. Apparently it's a bunch of pumps. It's a pump illustration, maybe a pump catalog illustration, or something like that. And it's photo engraved, and it's cut out very deeply so that I can print it just as if it was a woodcut. all the printing I'm going to do here is going to be hand printing too. I'm not going to use the printing press. The main reason I don't use a printing press, this is an intaglio press, not designed to print great big chunky things like this. For one thing, unless I could adjust this to a few thousandths of an inch of accuracy, I'd crush this. If I got it just, a couple thousandths too much pressure, it'd crush the plate. There goes my plate. If I didn't get enough pressure, of course, it wouldn't make a very good print. So there's virtually no way you can really adjust this press correctly to get a good print without either damaging some of the parts of the press or the printing plates itself. So you don't do relief printing on an intaglio press, the roller style press. We print by hand. There are advantages to that, of course. The disadvantage is that if you want to do great big large linoleum cuts, it's pretty difficult to print them and get them all to come out alike. Can be done, but it's very difficult. The one thing Evergreen doesn't have is a platen press. A platen press is designed to print great big linoleum cuts and wood cuts, and you don't have one. But they are adjustable but very expensive. They're $10,000. And the only school I know, in fact, I just forgot what school it was. It's so rare to find it. Now, a quick printing demonstration. And when I was starting out, I was soaking some paper. I put some paper over there in the sink to get it a little soft. When you print screen print or stencil prints, you can print on anything, fabric, dry paper. You can't print on wet paper, but you wouldn't want to anyway. But with intaglio, we're going to try to force this paper into the plate. So the softer it is, the better. And water is the best way to soften it. So that's why I'm soaking the paper over there. I'm going to be using a red ink here. It's a earth color. It's called Indian red. It's like a red ochre. And this ink was really intended to be used as an etching ink. These cans sit around and the lids get sort of stuck on them. And so what I'm doing here is I'm holding the lip of that lid down and getting a grip on the body of the can, and that way I don't hurt myself trying to open the can. It's a little slow. Most of the inks around the studio have been sitting for so long that they've got what's called a dead skin on them. And when in the management system, you have people who are in charge of inks. And one of the first jobs they do is they go through the whole studio and they round up all the inks and put them in little neat stacks. And then they start opening and seeing which are really cans of ink and which ones are dead. And then they come up with a want list, a wish list. And that's how it starts. So you open a can like this, there's probably about 1/8 of a pound of usable ink in here. The tool I have in my hands sold in the hardware store called a putty knife. And it's a stiff blade. They sell them in stiff and flexible. And the moment it comes into the printmaking studio, it's no longer a putty knife. It becomes an ink knife. So if you go in the hardware store, remember that. Say, I'd like to see your ink knives. They'll think you're, they won't know what you're talking about. The ink was designed for etching. And the thing that distinguishes one ink from another, like etching ink, lithography ink, woodblock ink, is usually the exact kind of varnish or vehicle that's been put in it to make it soft and runny. And so in order to make this ink behave better for my relief printing, I'm going to put a couple drops of this oil in it to soften it up. And this is called ink modification. That's another thing I give instruction in, is ink modifying. And again, the ink management team will see what kind of ink modifiers we have and which ones we might need to add to the inventory. Modifiers is just a generic term. From modifiers you go to those that stiffen the ink, those that soften the ink, those that make the ink transfer better, those that keep it from scumming, and so on. There are all kinds of different modifiers. Whenever I get an ink ready, I always play with it for a while, because when these inks sit around, they have an internal stiffening tendency. They sort of like rigor mortis sets in, and you have to kind of take it out and work them around. It isn't really dry, it's just stiff. It's just got sort of an internal bonding that's going on of some sort, and so you have to work it for a while. and that the friction, I guess, generates a little bit of heat, and it breaks down the bonds a little, and it starts being more manageable. The tools, we have a few here for small plates, rolling out small areas of color, are called brayers. There are many different designs of brayers. They all do the same thing. When it gets to be a big Herkin thing like this, it's called a roller. Anything that's bigger than 3 or 4 inches in diameter here is called a roller. When it gets little like this, it's called a brayer. The color here is Indian red. It's made in Seattle by the Daniel Smith Ink Company. I'm going to ink up the linoleum block first. And one thing that might impress you is that I just keep inking it and inking it and inking it. I'm the kind of a printer who likes to build the color up gradually. I don't like to try to lay it down on a big heavy coating all at once. I like to lay down a lot of thin coats. And the first proofs, prints when you take them out are called proofs. The reason they get the word proof is that you can say that you made a plate. Did you make a plate? Yeah, I got a plate all finished. Prove it. And the plate doesn't exist until you've got a proof from it. So it's called a proof. You call them prints too, but you'll hear me saying proof all the time. And proof also implies that you're not done yet. You're developing the plate, and you just took some proofs to see how it's coming along. And then it gets down into designated. That's a printer's proof, and that's a trial proof, and this is an experimental proof, and that's an artist's proof, and this is a family proof, and that's a studio proof. They have these little names attached to them. So it gets pretty complicated. This whole glossary of what kind of print it is. It's museum talk. It's the way people sort of tell historically what does this thing represent. And they say, oh, well, that's just a printer's proof. The artist always made a proof for the printer. Welcome to our 3. So you act like someone gets their doctor's degree figuring out why that artist always made 3 printer's proofs. Turns out the printer had a wife and a kid. So they give him 3, So you get a doctor's degree for finding that out, Artist proofs are interesting because if you are a person with a family and you're in printmaking as a profession, like myself, I always make proofs for my family. One for my daughter Jane, one for my daughter Nellie, one for my wife Linda. And so there's an artist proof designated Linda, Nellie, and Jane. And then they have their own boxes of my prints, because if it were up to me, I'd just sell them all. And so in a way, since I never thought I'd be rich enough to have much to leave them when I was dead, they have these prints. Of course, they can go out and sell them. Sure they can. They can...
You work the first one way and the opposite way.
I went all different directions. Now, I think I'll print on the print that I used yesterday, and I'm going to print this print dry, and then I'm going to dampen the sheet and print it damp. You can do it either way. You'd think that the wet paper would resist this oily ink, but it doesn't. Just because you put so much pressure on it, it has to print. And I've got yesterday's demo here, a light. It's actually black ink, but it was the first proof, so it's very light looking. And I also printed beside it the images from the cut, that little metal cut that I held up. What you see here in this oval is the next demonstration, the intaglio print, which comes in a few minutes. But first, I'm going to print the Indian red proof. There's another tool that I like to use. It's called a baran. It's a Japanese tool, and it's because I do the Japanese woodblock that I know about these. And they're a good rubbing tool, so that you don't need to use a press, a roller, or a platen press. You can use a rubbing tool. Real popular in America is a wooden spoon. A nice, good old wooden spoon that's been polished on the back, and that makes a good rubbing tool. Another one is a certain style of a drawer pull, a wooden drawer pull that you would screw onto a drawer. It has a kind of a convex face on it, and it's anything that sort of has a slightly rounded wooden surface. You can't use metal, you can't use glass, because they heat up. They get hot when you rub them, as you see I'm going to do. And so metal and glass don't work, but wood works perfectly. Just for fun, I'm going to see if I can do a little wild registration here. I have to be careful that the paper doesn't slip. There's a little friction going on here, so although I took a shower this morning, so my hair isn't very greasy yet, but a lot of times your hair is a good source of some oil that'll just make your rubbing tool slide around. Sometimes your nose is a good source. You'd be surprised how much difference it makes when you're doing this rubbing if you just put a little natural body oil of some sort on there. Well, it's very light as before. It comes off as just sort of a little slight color tone. That's just the first proof. I'm going to lay that over there. Now ink the block up again, but I'm going to add a little ink to the slab here, because now that I've done that light inking, I can build up the quantity and get a print that's stronger in color. And I'm going to need another piece of paper this time to print on. So could someone find me a piece of paper? And if you happen to see a piece of Japanese rice paper, like the one you saw had a screen print on, if you see some lightweight paper, hand that to me so that I can print on it, because it's a lot easier to get a strong print on lightweight paper.
Do you have to handle your water-based?
A little darker. And of course, by building up the ink layer, I could get it darker yet. So proof number 3 would probably be darker than that. Let's see now. What time is it? 5 after 11. Let me think now. Okay. I'm going to do the intaglio next. When the prehistoric people did their printmaking on the walls of their homes, they used stencil, and they also printed their handprints on the wall. So there you have the two old processes. In fact, I suppose if we could go back in time and talk to them and go in and visit and look at their art, you know, these handprints that were both handprints and stencil, we'd have to ask them, which one did you do first? And they probably did the printing first because it was a lot easier than that sort of stuff on the stenciling. But